Listeners, hello! We are Deep Dive, a broadcast that deeply explores the truth. Today is the second broadcast of a 10-part series, following our first broadcast last time. Today, we will embark on a deep exploration of the truth with you, our listeners.
And it is so wonderful to be back with everyone. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. And, well, listeners, today we are looking at a part of the broadcast material that makes a genuinely terrifying claim.
Terrifying is definitely the right word for it.
Right. It claims that in the ultimate court of law, just our private, fleeting thoughts make a person just as guilty as a convicted serial killer.
Yeah, it completely redefines the very concept of guilt. And innocence, for that matter.
It really does. So let's look at why that is and, how anyone could possibly survive that kind of intense scrutiny. But before we jump into that terrifying standard, let's ground everyone by looking back at the foundation we established in our first broadcast.
That is a great idea. We
Right.
need that context.
So last time, we unpacked the premise that human death is not simply a biological failing, right?
Exactly. It's not just cells eventually breaking down over time.
No, according to the author's logic, death is the direct, intended result of human sin.
Yes.
And even more sobering for our listeners, the text insists that death is not the end of the road. Judgment absolutely follows death.
Right. That underlying theology is incredibly critical to keep in mind as we move forward today.
We also examine the role of the entity referred to as Satan.
Ah, yes. The one who uses the stark reality of death to wield deceptive power over humanity.
Right, and the author's material suggests this entity heavily influences how people live their everyday lives, like keeping them in a constant state of avoidance or distraction.
Or outright denial regarding what happens after they take their last breath. People just don't want to think about it.
They really don't, but the most urgent takeaway from our last discussion was the concept of time. The broadcast material stresses that the absolute only window any human being has to prepare for this inevitable reality of death and that subsequent judgment is right now.
Yes, while the lungs are still drawing air.
Exactly. Once that breath stops, the window for preparation slams shut permanently. Which, it demands an incredibly practical question.
How does a person actually prepare for a judgment that sounds this absolute?
Right. If the clock is ticking for every single listener right now, where does the preparation even begin?
Well, the preparation has to begin with a fundamental re-examination of the root cause of both death and judgment.
So we have to look at the pathogen itself.
Precisely. If judgment is the disease, the pathogen is sin.
Ah.
But here's where we encounter a massive intellectual and psychological roadblock.
Okay, what kind of roadblock?
The central argument here is that there is a fundamental conflict between humanity's general understanding of what sin means and the standard presented in the text.
Oh, I see.
There's this profound worldwide misunderstanding that just has to be cleared up before any actual preparation can take place.
So let's scrutinize that roadblock right now, because the baseline argument presented in the broadcast material is that most people deeply struggle to accept the idea that they personally deserve death.
Right, let alone some terrifying judgment afterward.
Yeah, and looking at this objectively, it makes complete sense why people feel that way. When listeners look around at their neighbors or, when they evaluate their own lives, they see people living ordinary, relatively decent lives.
They go to work, they raise their children.
They try their best to follow societal rules. They pay their taxes. They wait for the green light at the crosswalk before walking.
They're just normal, good people by our standards.
Exactly. So why isn't that enough?
Well, it is not enough, because human beings naturally evaluate their standing based on comparison and societal norms. They are functioning within the acceptable parameters of human society.
Right.
But societal laws, the laws created by human beings, are fundamentally designed for a very specific, limited purpose.
Which is to regulate outward behavior.
Exactly, just outward behavior.
Right. Our human laws exist to keep the peace, to protect property, and to prevent individuals from physically harming one another. But wait a minute, expert. I have to push back here.
Go right ahead.
Because stepping into the shoes of our listeners, this concept feels incredibly jarring. It feels almost disproportionate.
How so?
Well, think about how society consumes news. When people see a report about a serial killer or a malicious fraudster who ruined hundreds of lives, there is a collective societal agreement.
Sure, everyone looks at the screen and thinks, yes, that person deserves severe punishment.
Exactly. We feel a sense of justice when a terrible person faces consequences. But applying that exact same terrifying standard of judgment to average, everyday people.
People who are just trying to get by and be kind to their neighbors.
Yeah, that's completely unacceptable to the modern mind. It feels completely unjust.
I hear you. And it absolutely feels disproportionate when we are utilizing our own human measuring stick.
It really does.
It is a totally natural reaction to feel defensive about this. But what's fascinating here is how the structural message of the text defines God's standard.
Okay, tell us about that structural message.
The laws of society are merely behavioral modifiers. They do not have the capacity to judge the actual essence of a person.
Okay, let's make this really clear. Consider someone walking down the street, looking at a house. Let's use an architectural analogy to really visualize this difference for our listeners.
I like that. Let's hear it.
So imagine an individual walks past a nice suburban home. From the sidewalk, the exterior paint looks fresh and vibrant. The windows are spotless and totally intact.
The lawn is perfectly manicured.
Right. So from that limited vantage point on the street, the passerby naturally assumes that the house is structurally sound and perfectly fine.
Because they don't see any glaring issues.
Exactly. Society declares it a good house. And that is exactly how human beings view themselves and others in society. We judge the visible exterior.
That is a highly effective way to visualize it. Societal laws only care about the exterior of the house.
Right, they just care if the windows are broken or if the property line is crossed.
Exactly. But the author's logic introduces a completely different paradigm. There is a massive gap, what the broadcast material describes as a heaven and earth difference between human legal standards and God's standard.
A heaven and earth difference.
Yes. God's standard is not looking at the exterior paint. It is examining the foundation, the hidden wiring, the very structural integrity of the home that no human eye can ever see.
So if human laws only regulate the outside of the house, what is the actual metric being used here by God? How does the text actually evaluate the inside?
Well, the broadcast material introduces pivotal texts from the New Testament to prove exactly how this metric works. Specifically, it points to passages in Matthew chapter 5 and 1 John chapter 3.
Oh, I've seen those referenced.
Yeah, these texts detail the specific mechanisms of how sin is calculated under God's standard. And let me tell you, the mechanism is completely disconnected from mere outward physical action.
Yeah, I have read those passages in the author's material, and let me tell everyone listening, the contents of these texts completely obliterate the good house analogy we just used.
They really do.
What exactly are the mechanics detailed in Matthew and 1 John? Because they are shocking.
According to the text, being angry at a brother makes a person subject to judgment.
Just being angry.
Just being angry. Furthermore, harboring lust in the mind is considered the exact same thing as committing the physical act of adultery.
Wow.
And hating a brother, just having the silent internal emotion of hatred in the heart, is equated to being a literal murderer.
Okay, I cannot let that pass without challenging it. That's completely unacceptable.
It is definitely a shock to the system.
How can a thought equal an action? In human jurisprudence, a person cannot be arrested for simply thinking about robbing a bank.
No, they certainly cannot.
The individual has to actually walk into the bank, present a weapon, and demand the money. To equate an internal, fleeting feeling of anger with the physical, catastrophic act of taking a human life? I mean, that seems entirely counterintuitive to everything society teaches about justice and morality.
It is a radical departure from human law, without a doubt. In modern legal terms, a crime usually requires both the guilty act and the guilty mind.
Right, the action and the intent.
But the text proposes a form of spiritual jurisprudence that operates on a higher, more absolute plane. In the logic of the text, God is the creator and absolute sovereign of the mind and the heart.
Okay.
Therefore, a mental rebellion or a silent harboring of malice is not just a precursor to a crime. It is an actual completed event in the spiritual realm.
Wait, a completed event, just the thought.
Yes. God judges the root, not just the visible fruit.
So the physical act of murder or adultery is merely the final, visible fruit of an invisible seed that was planted and nurtured in the mind.
Precisely. If the hatred is there, the capacity for murder is there. The text argues that the true nature of a person is defined by their internal reality, not just their restrained outward behavior.
That makes sense. People often refrain from committing crimes not because their hearts are pure, but because they fear the consequences.
Exactly. They fear going to prison, or they care deeply about their societal reputation.
So they just hide the hatred. You know, think about how people use smartphones today.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
Yeah. A smartphone analogy works perfectly to explain this mechanism for anyone, even listeners who aren't highly technical.
Let's hear it.
The world's standard of judging a person is just like checking a smartphone to see if the physical screen is cracked. You just look at the outside.
Right. If the screen isn't shattered, it's a good phone.
Exactly. If the screen is intact, the camera takes pictures, and the buttons click, society says, great, the phone is in perfect working condition.
Which is exactly like observing a person who goes to work, pays taxes, and doesn't break any physical laws.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But God's standard, as described in those New Testament texts, is like plugging that phone into a deep diagnostic software system.
A deep scan.
Right. This system completely ignores the pristine exterior casing. It bypasses the shiny screen and looks straight at the invisible code inside.
It's looking for what's running in the background.
Yes. It detects the hidden viruses, the lust, the hate, the anger, the jealousy that are running silently in the background of the operating system.
The things no one else can see.
Exactly. Those viruses are the very seeds of the crime. And here's the kicker. The diagnostic tool flags them as critical failures, even if no malicious app has been visibly opened on the screen yet.
That diagnostic scan is an excellent parallel. Under God's absolute standard, entertaining the seed of a crime in the heart yields the exact same guilty verdict as committing the physical act.
Because the virus is already in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, in the eyes of an absolute perfect standard, the line between the thought and the action is practically non-existent.
Okay, let us follow this logic to its absolute devastating conclusion.
We must.
Because if this is truly the standard, if an angry thought is judged as murder and a lustful thought is judged as adultery, isn't every single human being a severe sinner?
Yes.
I mean, is there anyone on earth who won't be judged under these parameters?
The author's material drives toward a tragic, inescapable reality here. Under this specific absolute standard, every single person who has ever lived is exposed as a severe sinner.
Every single person.
Every single one. The logic is uncompromising here. It is absolutely impossible for any human being to live completely free of sin under this standard.
Because we just can't control our minds that perfectly.
Right. Humans cannot control every fleeting thought, every momentary flash of anger, every selfish or arrogant desire.
It's impossible.
Therefore, no one can avoid the terrifying judgment after death based on their own merits or their own perceived societal goodness.
It just strips away all human pride, doesn't it?
Completely.
It doesn't matter if an individual is a renowned philanthropist who gives millions to charity, or if they are a convicted felon. If the standard is absolute internal perfection, everyone fails.
Everyone is in the exact same boat.
Consider a master chef making a massive, beautiful pot of soup.
Ooh, this is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, imagine the chef spends all day preparing it. They use the freshest vegetables, the best cuts of meat, the perfect blend of spices.
That was delicious.
It smells incredible, and it represents decades of hard work, charity, and quote-unquote good deeds. But then, just before the chef serves it, one single drop of lethal poison falls into the pot.
Just one drop. The poison acting as a metaphor for a single, fleeting, hateful thought or a moment of deep, silent anger.
Yes, exactly. Just one drop of poison. Now, the chef cannot just take a spoon and scoop that poison back out.
No, it's mixed in.
Right, it immediately dissolves and permeates the entire massive pot of soup. Society might argue, wait, that soup is still 99.9% nutritious and made of wonderful ingredients.
But the reality is much darker.
Yeah, because this text argues that the one drop has completely tainted the whole thing. The entire pot is now deadly. It cannot be served to a perfect judge. It must be thrown away.
The soup is irreparably compromised. All human effort, all of the good deeds in the world, cannot neutralize the poison of internal sins when measured against an absolute standard of purity.
But wait, I have to interject again on behalf of our listeners.
Please do.
Isn't that incredibly pessimistic? If someone spends their whole life helping the poor, does this text really argue that a momentary flash of anger invalidates decades of charity?
It does sound harsh.
That seems profoundly unjust. Why would a creator set an impossible standard? Did God just set a rigged game where humanity is destined to lose and face judgment no matter how hard they try?
It's a very natural reaction to feel that way.
I mean, what is the actual point of a standard that literally no one can meet?
That is the most logical question to ask when faced with this terrifying standard. But the author's material asserts that God knew human limitations perfectly.
So it wasn't a surprise?
Not at all. God was not surprised by humanity's inability to maintain internal perfection. The standard was not a mistake, nor was it a rigged game.
Then what was it?
Instead, the expert structural explanation provided in the text reveals a long-term, deliberate plan. Yes, Starting from the very beginning in Genesis, God used the Old Testament to continually and systematically reveal humanity's inescapable sinful nature to them.
So the impossible standard wasn't given so that humans could successfully achieve it.
No, it wasn't.
It was given to serve as a mirror.
Precisely.
Yeah.
A mirror cannot wash your face, right? It can only show you the dirt.
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
The Old Testament laws were designed to bring human beings to the profound, humbling realization that they cannot save themselves.
They need help.
Exactly. If they rely on their own goodness, they will always fail that deep diagnostic scan we talked about. But God did not leave humanity entirely without recourse during this period of history.
Okay, so what did they do?
The broadcast material explains a fascinating mechanism introduced during this time, which is the mechanism of sacrifice.
Yes, the text mentions that God formed the nation of Israel and gave them a specific temporary method to deal with this constant failure, and that was the blood sacrifice of animals.
Right.
But why blood? Why was that specific thing the mechanism?
Well, in the theological framework of these writings, the penalty for sin is death. It is a cosmic debt.
A life for a life.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
When a person sins, a life is owed. So the mechanism of sacrifice introduced the concept of substitution.
Ah, substitution.
The blood of an innocent animal was offered in place of the guilty human. The life of the animal was given to temporarily satisfy the debt of the human sin.
But it was only temporary, right? Because the author's logic is very clear that they would offer these animal sacrifices to temporarily wash away their sins, but it wasn't a permanent solution.
No, it was inherently flawed by design. The blood of an animal, a creature without moral reasoning, could never permanently pay the debt for the internal, perpetual, conscious sins of a human being.
It just couldn't cover the depth of the issue.
Right. It was a placeholder, a temporary stay of execution, if you will. It provided a moment of relief, but the root problem remained completely untouched.
You know, returning to our smartphone analogy, this temporary Old Testament system is exactly like clearing the cache or deleting a few old photos on a phone when it gives that dreaded storage full notification.
Oh, everyone hates that notification.
Listeners know exactly what happens. The phone freezes up. It warns that it is completely out of memory and about to crash.
It becomes unusable.
Exactly. So the user goes in, deletes a few old videos, and clears the cache. This gives a little bit of temporary breathing room. The phone starts working again for a few days.
But the core issue, the lack of permanent storage and the underlying viruses, has not been resolved at all.
Right. Because the person is still using the phone, downloading things, and running those background apps, it inevitably fills up with junk data again.
The problem just comes right back.
Yes, the storage full warning comes right back. Deleting a few photos is not a permanent fix for a phone with a fundamentally flawed operating system and a tiny hard drive.
That perfectly illustrates the exhaustion of the Old Testament system. The people would sin, they would offer an animal sacrifice, their storage would be temporarily cleared, but then
they just go back to sinning.
Exactly. They would immediately walk away from the altar and go back to harboring anger, lust, and hatred in their minds. The cycle was endless.
It sounds exhausting.
It was an exhausting, continuous loop that proved, over centuries, that human beings needed a fundamental structural upgrade, not just a temporary cache clearance.
This really highlights the sheer desperation of the human condition according to the text. I mean, if human beings cannot meet the standard of the mind and the animal sacrifices can only act as a temporary band-aid, there's a massive problem.
A seemingly insurmountable problem.
Right. How can anyone possibly escape the terrifying judgment after death? Which brings us to the ultimate climax of the author's material, the permanent solution.
Yes. Because the temporary sacrifices were fundamentally insufficient, God promised a Messiah throughout the entirety of the Old Testament.
This was the plan all along.
Exactly. This is crucial for listeners to understand. This wasn't a sudden change of plans or a plan B because the animal sacrifices failed.
Right. The failure was intentional.
The failure of human effort was the point. The promise of a permanent savior was woven through centuries of history, serving as the ultimate destination of this long-term plan.
And the broadcast material relies on firm historical grounding for this transition, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
The text points out that about 2,000 years ago, God sent Jesus to the land of Israel as this long-awaited, promised Messiah.
The culmination of the entire Old Testament.
Yes. And his arrival was for one exact purpose: to fulfill the requirement of permanently washing away sins, doing away with that endless, exhausting cycle of temporary animal sacrifices.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, We find the detailed documentation of this fulfillment in the New Testament, specifically in the historical accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
But how does one person's life act as a permanent solution? If the penalty for humanity's sin is an infinite debt, how does the Messiah actually pay it?
Well, in the logic of the text, a debt of perfection is owed to an absolute standard.
Okay.
If humanity is spiritually bankrupt, someone with infinite funds has to pay that specific debt.
That makes logical sense.
Jesus was sent to do what humans absolutely could not do with their own strength, and what the blood of animals could never permanently achieve.
Because he met the internal standard?
Precisely. By living a life that perfectly met the absolute internal standard of God, harboring no viruses of hatred, lust, or anger, the Messiah possessed the perfect, untainted life required to permanently satisfy the cosmic debt.
Wow. It is as if, returning to the smartphone analogy one last time, instead of the user frantically clearing the cache every week just to keep the phone from crashing, the manufacturer itself intervened.
A total recall and upgrade.
Exactly. The manufacturer sent a completely new, infinitely large, incorruptible operating system that permanently patches all the background viruses, forgives the lack of storage, and prevents the phone from ever crashing again.
That is the exact mechanism of the permanent solution presented in the New Testament. It replaces the endless, futile striving of human effort with a completed, permanent work of substitution.
The perfect life is exchanged for the flawed ones.
Exactly.
Listeners, this has been an incredibly dense and profound journey through the broadcast material today. We have covered a vast amount of philosophical and theological ground.
We really have. It's a lot to process.
We started by tearing down the illusion of human goodness, right? Scrutinizing the idea that just because people aren't committing heinous physical crimes, their house is perfectly fine.
Which is a very hard illusion to break. And then we explored the devastatingly high diagnostic standard of God's law.
Right, where the invisible seed of a thought like hidden anger or lust is judged with the exact same severity as the physical crime itself, which completely upends human jurisprudence.
And facing the inescapable reality that absolutely no human being can survive that standard, we looked at how God provided a temporary fix.
Through the animal sacrifices of the Old Testament, it was a system meant to hold back the floodwaters, so to speak, while continually acting as a mirror pointing out humanity's need for a structural upgrade.
Yes. And finally, we arrived at the climax of the author's logic, the arrival of Jesus 2,000 years ago as the promised Messiah.
Sent to be the permanent solution to human sin and the ultimate shield against post-death judgment.
A truly massive paradigm shift.
But, this leaves us standing on the edge of a massive cliffhanger.
It does indeed.
We know who the permanent solution is, according to the text, but the most crucial question remains. How exactly did Jesus accomplish this massive, permanent work 2,000 years ago?
The actual mechanics of the cross.
Yes. What were the actual mechanics of this solution on the cross? And perhaps most importantly for everyone listening right now, how does an event that occurred in the ancient past on the other side of the world practically apply to listeners today?
That is the ultimate question.
How does it actively function as an effective shield against that terrifying judgment we talked about?
Those are the exact questions we must answer next. But before we go, there is a final provocative thought that every listener needs to mull over.
What is that?
We have talked extensively about God's standard acting as a deep diagnostic scan of the internal world. If the invisible seeds of thoughts, hidden anger, secret resentments, and silent desires are the true measure of reality before this absolute standard, what hidden viruses are running in the background of your mind right now that have been willfully ignored?
Oh, wow. What a chilling and necessary question to end on. Listeners, we want to warmly thank you for joining us on this intense exploration of the author's material today.
It has been a pleasure.
The stakes presented in these writings are incredibly high, but the text promises a profound resolution. Please make sure to tune in to our next deep dive, the third broadcast in our 10-part series, where we will finally uncover the ultimate answer to how this permanent solution actually works. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.